Hi, I'm Angie Pontani, the burlesque superstar who has spent the last 20 years shimmying and shaking around the globe. I've performed in showrooms, ballrooms, small rooms, and big rooms, every room except a mushroom. Along the way, I've met some amazing people, and I'd like to introduce them to you. Together, we will pull back the curtain to reveal what really happens behind the glitter, feathers, and tassels. So join me for the bump and grind. Inspired by the raw underground and fetish scene of the 90s, showwoman Marisa Carnesky visited New York City with her own vision, picked up a bit of our Big Apple grit, and returned to London with her own unique and pioneering style that includes visions of burlesque and beyond. I loved this chat because not only does Marisa have a tremendous career under her boa that includes shows galore and even a Laurence Olivier Acting Award, her pieces go beyond striptease and incorporate stories and journeys of women in so many different circumstances of life. From an hour-long one-woman show to elaborate ghost trains, compelling and complex imagery slow dance together with serious subject matter in shows that often cast several burlesque performers whose names you probably know. And Marisa's name, that name is one we should all know. Her work is nonstop and a beautiful vessel for stories and journeys so many of us can relate to. Please enjoy my chat with the one and only Marisa Carnesky, showwoman. Marisa, thank you so much for being here with me today. Third time is a charm. We were thwarted by New York City construction workers.
Wow.
Yes, but they're finally gone.
It's very different to where I live. I live on the seafront in Brighton in England, so in a Regency idyll, so there's no construction here.
That sounds absolutely delightful. Sounds like a far cry from where I live in Brooklyn, where there's constant construction and they don't tell you when it's going to start or stop or why it's even happening. Wow. So, New York. So, Marisa, you have this amazing career. And I've been looking at, we put all these notes together every time we do the show. And, I've heard about you over the years. But when I sat down and look at the notes, it's like, man, you have had a tremendous career with so many amazing things. It's unbelievable.
Well, interestingly, when you asked me to do this, I'm in the middle of doing this archiving project and looking back over all the things that I've done. And one of the things I've done, because I've heard of you for years and years and years. And I came to New York in 1994.
Wow, great year.
And I went to see the Dutch Weissman's Follies.
Oh, no, you didn't!
I did. And I became very good friends with Billy Madley.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
And we're in a HBO documentary, because I also became good friends with Jennifer Blowdryer.
Wow.
And I came to meet Annie Sprinkle, because this woman who organises big events, kind of sex-positive parties in England, called Tuppy Owens, who you may have come across, who was kind of the Annie Sprinkle generation in London before there was a burlesque scene, when it was kind of weird 1970s and 80s, like sex positive parties, whatever. So Tuppy said, I said, I'm going to New York. She said, go and meet Annie. And Annie shot me for her playing cards. And then there I was in New York. And she said, go and meet Jennifer Blowdryer. So I went to meet her. And this was in 93. So I was hanging about in New York, and I started performing in the Blue Angel.
Wow!
And I met Billy Madley and Amy Goodhart.
Yes.
And then I came to see Dutch Weissman's Follies in an apartment where there's a stage inside the apartment. And I had the most exciting, thrilling time of my life. And then I came back to England for whatever reasons. And then like a couple of years later, Jennifer got HBO to fly me back to New York. And they were making a documentary about the Smutfest in an old synagogue in the East Village. And so I've always had this huge attachment to New York, and I was doing burlesque in London, and there really was no burlesque scene to speak of. There was like Matt Fraser and me knocking around in Tuppy Owens's clubs.
Was this before? Was this because I feel like the 90s when you were here, and I got my start in Dutch Wiseman's with Amy Goodhart. I
read that.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, so I probably did meet you.
Yes,
then.
You probably did. I really can never, I believe I came in like late 94 or it may have been early 95, but Billy was not in the show anymore when I came in. It was just Amy. But Amy Goodhart and Billy Madley, two tremendous burlesque pioneers. Dutch Wiseman's was really the first show in New York City that was that core, like, this is a burlesque show. It was amazing. Yes. And so that's where I got my start. But that was such an amazing time for you to be here and experience all of that. Did you go back to London and then do it? Or was it also happening in London at that time?
So it wasn't really happening in London, particularly. No, it wasn't. So I kind of was inspired. So there was this kind of alternative fetish scene in London. That was the thing that was happening here. And there was rockabillys, and there was kind of burlesque-ish stuff in some of the rockabilly clubs. And the two hadn't really kind of come together. There wasn't any kind of contemporary burlesque. There was one woman called Louise, who I met again years later, who called herself the Beat Girl. So there was this 60s revival scene. And she used to do a bit of a strip at the end of her singing. And it was all 60s and psychedelic. And there was a thing here called the Frat Shack that they then moved to Melbourne. And then there's a whole, they do them over there, the Wild Weekend. It's this couple called Josh and Barbara. And it's all like 60s go-go.
I've heard of this. Yeah.
Right. And so that it was in London, and then it moved to Australia. And before I went to New York, or maybe it was when I got back, so we were trying to do some form of kind of burlesque in this 60s club. And I remember he was a set builder. He built all these volcanoes, a volcano that exploded and bras that exploded.
Oh my God, I love it. That's so
that
cool.
was the beginning of burlesque in London. But yeah, so I kind of was pretty much alone in London, and people were like, you're just a stripper, kind of trying to hold this fort. And there was a couple of people started to appear, but I'm sure there were other people that were doing it, but I do remember being the lonely burlesque dancer of London in 1994. And then I flew over, HBO, no, it wasn't HBO, so this woman, Tuppy, we flew over Jennifer Blowdryer and a poet. We did Jennifer's thing. We did the Smut Fest, and we did it in London, but we did the London version, and we found kind of strippers who were a bit more vocal or a bit more arty, and there was a lot of rockabilly types, and it was this kind of weird 90s prototype of a burlesque kind of cabaret club that we were trying to do. We did it in Camden, which is now a bit naff in London. It's not like the hit place anymore. It wasn't even the hit place then.
How did the crowds respond when you came back from New York and kind of brought elements of this style? And clearly you made it your own there too, fitting in with that whole beat thing, which I always think is so London.
Yeah,
whenever I hear Beat Girl, I'm like, so London cool, you know?
Yeah.
How did they respond to it?
Well, it was, there wasn't a lot of people doing it, and I felt quite alienated, and I was kind of mixing it with these monologues and these one-woman shows. So I was mixing it, and I looked back now at a show I did, this 1 hour one-woman show, and I was telling stories about strippers because I'd worked also as like what we call a proper stripper in London, which is grim. Really much more grim. I'm sure it's grim in New York, but in the time in London, there's a thing in London that the dancers, you would perform in pubs, and they didn't always have a stage. Sometimes you would be dancing on the pool table, and you would go around with a pint glass, and the guys would put like pound coins in your pint glass before you danced. It was really grim. But I really wanted to be a stripper. I wanted to kind of understand, I think I became a good performer because of the stripping. But I was a graduate from art school. I'd been I'd studied contemporary dance, and I was a nice middle class girl. But I decided for some reason to become a stripper.
Where does this motivation come from? Because your career has a thread of just kind of pushing against social norms and just doing your own thing and dissecting things and retwisting them. Where does this come from inside of you?
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a kind of random anarchic Jewish gene that I inherited, and it's strange. And what I really liked, I was kind of looking at stuff about you before we did this talk, and I really liked some of the videos I found where you said, I can get the stains out of anything, and I'm this immaculate, beautiful home, and I really liked that kind of embodiment of kind of womanliness about you that is, I think, connects to an identity that I identify with, a kind of immigrant identity. I know you come from an Italian background,
yes, yeah.
right? And I'm from an Eastern European Jewish background. I mean, my grandparents were my great grandparents were the immigrants, and so my grandparents were learning the English, and so it's I have this confusion about and I think the contradiction is my drive to make the work. So on one hand, I had a very happy family life, and I was from a very traditional background, and then I've got this random punk rock streak that got channeled specifically through this kind of burlesque thing, because I wasn't a singer, I wasn't a musician, I was training as a dancer. It was the early 90s. I went to, I graduated. I was in a German expressionist dance troupe. That was the first thing I was in.
Wow. What is a German expressionist dance troupe? What does that mean?
Well, that is a good question. So I was, I studied dance, and I studied ballet and contemporary dance. And then one of my tutors, she was really obsessed with the Weimar Republic, and she had done some research. Her name's Liz Agis, and she had done some research into the German expressionist dances of the Weimar and the performers that were in the Weimar, which is roughly what they based the Sally Bowles character on. But she was looking at the real women in that era. And so she had a dance company kind of built around her research, and she asked me to join her dance company. So I was completely obsessed with cabaret and the 30s and the 40s. And I was very influenced because I grew up in the middle of London. I was very influenced by the British kind of goth punk scene. So I was going to nightclubs when I was 14. I was really into Susie and the Banshees, and I was wearing corsets and dyeing my hair purple and, going out, hiding my clothes so my mum couldn't see what I was wearing. So I was wearing very sexualized clothes in this kind of British punk scene. And it's small. London is small, and you get to know everybody very quickly. So I kind of mutated and I was influenced by, things like watching the Derek Jarman film Jubilee and seeing Jordan, who was this British punk figure, on point, doing ballet, dressed as Britannia. And I think all of those, and, I come out of Britain, so I loved Kate Bush, and they were all dancers. All those women, as well as being singers, they were dancers. And there was this fantastic company called the Lindsay Kemp Company, which was this British camp, very, very camp clown mime artist who was incredibly unfashionable in Britain and was kind of left Britain to run his company. It was a very queer mime company, but it supposedly David Bowie, not supposedly, that it is the case. So David Bowie and Kate Bush both spent time in the Lindsay Kemp Company.
Okay.
So I went as a young woman to see the Lindsay Kemp Company. They weren't in it by that point. And it was a high camp aesthetic, this kind of high British camp, intensely visual and theatrical. And I saw that in my local theatre, which was like half an hour from my house. And, I was in nightclubs from a very young age. And so this nice Jewish girl mutated.
Yes.
I rejected this old-fashioned community and this what wasn't old-fashioned, it was just like the Jewish community of North London that my family are completely entrenched in and that my sister is entrenched in, and I rejected it, and I became a wildly theatrical, painted up, sexually dressed 14-year-old, and it's just never gone away. And and I just, I fell into this by accident, but I started making shows, and I've never stopped. And I turned 50 in February, and I'm still making shows.
And please don't stop. So you took all those influences and even the inspiration of your family and your Jewish experience and the experience of coming from a family that had immigrated, and that those cultures can get so intense. And I understand it because I can really relate to that. But you took all that and you turned it into this amazing career of creating these performances and curating these experiences. And you also really started from burlesque too, in a sense, but I don't want to say you're so much more than a burlesque performer because that doesn't sound right. But what do you consider yourself? Do you consider yourself a performance artist, a producer? Like, if you had to title yourself, what would you title yourself?
Well, this is interesting because I was having this Thursday. I don't know what day it is. I made a film with some of my students. We're trying to record my workshops, and I heard that this young performance artist in Britain, she's doing really well, and she's getting on telly and whatever. And I was like, oh, in my day we couldn't. It was, we did get on the telly, we did, but it was quite hard to get. It's quite hard to kind of with what we do to cross over. So I thought, oh, I never really. Sorry, this is a long answer, but
okay.
It's because I've been looking through my archives, and I looked back at this show I did in 1995 when I just got back from New York, and it was all these stories about strippers and burlesque dancers, and it was all these stories where I described the interior of my childhood home and compared it to my body and looked at the whole idea of the ostentatious taste or immigrant taste and my body, and it was this beautiful piece. And at the time, the art scene in London, and I was the performer, and I was singing, I was on the microphone, singing, dancing, acting. I had lots of range in my voice. I wasn't shouting or screaming. And it was a really beautiful piece, and it had these proper little burlesque dances in. And I had these rockabilly dudes on the stage playing gretches, like really great musicians live with me. And it didn't get picked up. It was 1995. It wasn't what was going on in London. It wasn't fashionable. It was probably more of a New Yorkie show in a way. But anyway, London was like Blur and Oasis and like British, it had gone this kind of funny, laddie, Britishy route at that point in London. And it wasn't glamorous at that point. I don't know. Britpop or whatever, and it was all like sportswear. There was I've been incredibly good at being before my time.
Yes.
In everything. And people say, oh, you're ahead of the time. It's like, I'm just not aligned with the time. Anyway, it's a shame because it means that what I do then seems to become commercial 10 years later. And I'm like, damn, I've moved on to something else now. So there was this moment when I think I had a really, really great show as a performer, writer, as a kind of author, performer, dance, singing, acting, that kind of thing. But then I wasn't satisfied, and I don't know if it's a Jewish thing, but I wanted to prove myself on every level. So I saw that people were building structures or doing walkabout shows, and I was like, I want to build a ghost ride.
Yes.
And then before I did that, I wanted to do this show. I got covered in tattoos, and I was like, I'm going to make a show called Jewess, Tattooess, because this was a big conflict so I made this very beautiful, gentle show, which was stories of old strippers, beautifully done, well realized. We're just editing the footage. It's going to go up online before the end of the month, hopefully.
Oh, so, good.
Yeah, I'm putting 30 years of my work as being edited into small 2-minute chunks.
It's a tremendous job.
It's a big job. And it's been actually very emotional to do it, because I particularly looked at this piece that was called Dragon Lady in 1995, and I thought, oh my God, I had it. That was it. Why did I then build a ghost train, write other shows, start a school, director circus. Why did I do all those things? Because I had it just as the performer, author, dancer. But for some reason, I wasn't satisfied, and I wanted to know all the other way. I wanted to build, I don't know why I needed to prove myself as a producer, but I was obsessed with it. I had to raise the funds. I had to find out how you got investors. And
yeah,
I mean, now it's harder to do now than it was then, but I had to run the show. I tell you what, and I think this is interesting as a woman and as a woman playing with sexual imagery as well, is I just wanted to kick against. I didn't want to be silent. I didn't want to be told what to do, and I didn't want a boss.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be the boss. And in being the boss, I wanted to treat my performers the way that I had wanted to be treated. And I really wanted to change that up, and I really wanted to make that different. I wanted power, but in a kind of socialist, ethical way.
Yeah.
I wanted to have control over the projects. And so we hired, I worked with all different artists, but at one point, we hired the big strip club, which is now the Box.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But was then the Raymond Review Bar. Yeah, exactly. So it was then the Paul Raymond Review Bar, and nobody ever hired it because it was the in-house produced show by the Paul Raymond Company. And Paul Raymond was the famous pornographer in Britain.
So, but Marisa, do you think, because I mean, when I'm hearing you talking about these stories and you wanted to have power and control and to produce these shows, it seems to me because even when you talked about in the beginning, when you came back and you were doing burlesque and you said, I did a 1 woman show, 1 hour long, 1 woman show. That's so much more than is required if you just wanted to do a burlesque show. But it's you want to tell the story. You want to kind of, you are the narrative. So I feel like that in itself is powerful.
Yeah. I mean, there wasn't a burlesque scene at all. And there wasn't really one in New York either. There was Billy and you guys at Dutch Weissman's. That was it. And there was the Smutfest, which wasn't a burlesque scene. It was strippers and porn people telling their stories, and maybe some cool rock and roll, music projects like Voluptuous
that
Horror.
90s fetish.
Yeah,
that
it was
fetish
90s
vibe
fetish.
in the 90s was so big in the city.
Exactly. Kembra Fowler. And the beginnings of the Black Lips performance cult that was Anthony and who became Anthony and the Johnsons. So that was, that was who I found in New York. So there was no burlesque scene, and it was you guys that were doing it. And I can't remember what your question was.
But just how you make it so your own. You didn't just go back and say, I'm just going to do a 5-minute routine. You went back and you make it this 1 woman show. You tell the stories. Your presentations you're telling the story. You're owning the narrative. So in addition to just being I'm producing these 700 shows and they're all going to be huge and amazing, it's telling this story too. Yes. So it's not just the fluff.
I did both. So I went into clubs and I started doing these routines in clubs, and people were like, oh, she's just a stripper. But then I wasn't taking everything off, and it was really beautifully styled. And, so I was doing these routines in all kinds of clubs for celebrities. I did this routine in front of a number of celebrities, including Brad Pitt.
Ooh.
Yeah. Well, we all do those corporate parties, don't we? But it was when there was this little scene burgeoning in London, and there was this one stupid club that used to employ us. It was called Cabaret with a K, and it used to get all the kind of
edgy.
Yeah. It had all the celebrities would come in to this club, and I was one of the acts. And then there was this Amy Saunders, who became Misbehave, who's running Misbehave's game show in Vegas. It was me and her. And a couple of other people. We were the acts. We were the only acts they had, because there weren't any other acts in London at the time. This is how it used to be. So we used to work there 3 or 4 nights a week, because there was no other acts they could find. But anyway, so people thought I was just a stripper. So I was doing it there. I was doing it in fetish clubs. I was doing it in all sorts of places. So I was doing the short acts. But then I think because I'd come from that theatre dance background, and because I'd really was invested in the more performance art side of stuff, like the feminist performance art, Karen Finley, Annie Sprinkle, and the artists like that in the UK, which there weren't really many, to be honest. I mean, I'm sure there were, but come to mind as quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I liked a lot of American performance, and which is why I went to New York to.
Well, in that time, it was so they pushed the boundaries so hard. It was such a wild time in New York. It was really influential.
Exactly. And so I was informed by that. So they did 1 hour one woman shows. Penny Arcade, Annie Sprinkle, Karen Finley. They were 1 hour one woman shows. So I was like, I'm going to do a 1 hour one woman show. But I wasn't an actor, and I was a dancer. And I loved old worldy dancing, and I wanted to recreate, I had this strong, deep sense of nostalgia and dreaminess, and I wanted to bring that to life. But as you say, I wanted to tell the stories of that as well. And then it kind of went from there, and it went into all different directions. And, I went to Mexico, I had a Mexican tattooist boyfriend. I went to live in Mexico City. I was really obsessed with Jodorowsky, the films of Jodorowsky, so that really informed me as well. So I had a bit of Mexico, had a bit of New York, had a bit of London.
Tell me about your show. What was your show that really brought your tattoos and your Jewish heritage together, your religion? Like, how did you come up with that concept? And I mean, did your family freak out when you started to get all these tattoos? Was it a big thing?
Well, they did and they didn't. I was such a willful person that I was always the boss from like day one. And my mother is a very gentle lady, and she just would say things. I wouldn't show her them. I would kind of keep them covered. And she would just say things like, well, don't get any more, dear. Just don't get any more.
Oh.
And, and I don't think they really knew the extent of them. But I did invite them to the shows, and I look at the shows that I was doing, and they came and saw me naked and whatever. But so the Jewess Tattooess, it was just, what happened was I was going to get this big tattoo on my back, and my back is a dragon. The whole back is a dragon. And I'd already started these huge arm pieces, which I thought was small at the time. And I still don't think I've quite understood what I actually look like to other people, because in my mind I look completely normal, and then I see these pictures of myself and I'm like, whoa, fucking hell, they're huge. But I was going to have this big dragon thing put on my back, which I did, and I said to I was discussing it maybe with my sister or somebody else that was Jewish, that you can't technically be buried in a Jewish cemetery with your family. So it brings me back to this family thing.
Yeah.
If you have tattoos. And I just thought that is such an extreme thing. And I think I'd already had a couple of tattoos and kind of knew that, but hadn't really looked into it. So I decided to look into it. And I was looking into, the amazing stories of, Jewish occult stories, Judaism and demonology, and the whole exorcist thing is from an old Jewish story called the Dybbuk. So it's all about the menstrual, prepubescent girl being possessed by a demon and saying profane things. So it's kind of, in a sense, it's about demonizing the feminine or the menstrual, or there's a lot of
Isn't it always
things. Isn't it always?
Isn't it always?
Exactly. These themes have always run through my work. So there's something about blood taboos, and there's also something in Judaism about it's not like Catholicism, which kind of merged the old pagan Greek gods and Roman gods in with the kind of new in Judaism, you're not supposed to worship any idols. And so and the tattoos are kind of worshipping idols in a way. You don't mark yourself for the dead. So I got really interested in why Jews don't get tattoos, what tattoos mean on the woman, what it means to kind of blood and demons and old folk tales and old fairy tales and all these things. And I kind of mushed them all up together, and looked particularly at the myth of Lilith. And I mean, and looked at Victorian melodrama and what they called burlesque as a phrase coming out of British music hall. I think it has very different connotations in America. Yeah. Connected with Mae West, and it was saucy and sexual. But when you burlesqued something England in the Victorian Music Hall, it was to make a mockery of it.
Yes.
And it was parody. So I was looking at parody and Victorian entertainment, and anyway, so I made a show out of all that. And what I did was I did two shows. I did one show, which was a really great show, and I had these big tattooed arms made by tattooist Alex Binney, like going back three proscenium arch.
Wow.
All this stuff is soon to go online. And I was wandering around in a white nightie with a Jewish candlestick, and I had a bed of nails, and I had this whole story that I told, and it was a story about it was kind of mixing the Dybbuk with freaks, like this was the 90s. So this hadn't been done before. It wasn't oversaturated at that point. So I was connecting the Dybbuk story, which is like The Exorcist, where a little Jewish girl gets possessed, and I had all these characters that I played that were on film, and then I was live, and then she goes and joins the fair, the carnival, and becomes a tattooed lady. So I did that version of the show, which when I look at it, it stands the test of time. It really works on video. They were on videos. But then it wasn't really getting booked, and it wasn't really getting the attention I wanted it to get. So I reworked it and made it much more live arty, as we say in England. I made it much more minimal, and I did all the monologues really deadpan, and I didn't move that much. And I did a live Star of Day. I made it look like art.
Oh, wow.
But the text was the same, the monologues were the same, the theme was the same, the films were the same. I even, at one point, I put on the Whore of Babylon Metropolis-style burlesque costume, but I just wore it and just stood still in a light,
And that was
that
it?
version. And that, well, no, whilst, lying with their nails, doing monologues, I just did a different version that was more in the aesthetic of art and less in the aesthetic of this kind of reinvented carnival melodrama, which, looking back, was my instinct and what I loved, but I kind of then artified it. And when I made it arty, it got booked all over the world.
That's so funny.
Like the LA International Festival, there was posters of me next to Baryshnikov. I was in the Madrid, I was in everywhere. It even was toured into, there's this radical festival in Israel, Palestine, but it's in a Palestinian town. It involves Israeli and Palestinian artists coming together. I did it there. I did it in Eastern Europe, Central Europe, all over.
Did you ever question, because you trained in ballet,
yes,
right? Growing up, and you had wanted to be, you are a dancer, you are a dancer, but did you always endeavor, did you want to be a professional ballerina? Did you ever want to go straight ballet, straight, dancing, or did you always have some sauce on it? Essentially what I want to know is, did you ever question, if I tattoo my arms and my back and I'm a dragon, I'm not going to get booked for the things that I want to get booked?
Yeah.
Did it ever cross your mind?
Well, it did. I mean, but by then I had already gone past that. So I had been at a dance company, the Germanic kind of, it wasn't, the choreographer's British, but the style of stuff we were doing was exploring this expressionism. So I had been in a dance company, but I had already dropped out of the ballet school, gone and lived in a squat. Then I came back and finished a degree with this different college, and I got into kind of performance art, contemporary dance. And I had already gone down this road of being a very alternative person, and that was so important to me. And, I reached a certain level of professionalism with ballet, but I wasn't to the standard that could have been in a company. I was to the standard that, I passed on stage as somebody with some training, but I was never going to. But yes, early on, I didn't want to be in other people's shows, and I think this is a defining thing, is that I could have pursued that, and I could have gone to auditions for musicals, and I could have gone to auditions for other people's shows, but I specifically didn't want kind of some privileged man telling me what to do, because I just felt that I had my own idea and that I wanted to do my own thing. I had to be the author. So there is.
Well, your visions are so precise. Like the works that you've created are so aesthetically you. Like the Ghost Train comes to mind. Like that was the early 2000s for you, right? But so like Victorian. It's got this like sideshow, circusy, Victorian flair? Like, what are the odds that you're going to be like, oh, look, a ballet that's a sideshow, circus flair thing? Like, what inspired you to put together the Ghost Train?
Yeah, so one show comes out of the other in a sense, and one grows out of the other. So the themes in Jewess, Tattooess, which is the old world, Eastern Europe, with the kind of immigrant identity, that led to another one called The Girl from Nowhere, where I looked at stories of sex trafficked women and disappeared women between East and West, different generations of women going from the East to the West and their stories. And
wow.
I then thought, I know I'm going to make this into a ghost train. So the facade of the ghost train is was kind of carved, and it looked like fairground art from the kind of the heyday of live performance in the fairs in Britain, or you would call that the kind of the sideshow or the carnival in America. And so, the heyday of Coney Island is the era from which I based the facade of the show. But I didn't want it to be about celebrating a kind of fake historical nostalgia, or so the aesthetic was like an old ride, but it was kind of pin up. I wanted to pin up girls on the front, like you would get on a ride, but with kind of ghosts of people coming through. So we had the images with their superimposed. It was all hand painted, but the interior of the ride was images of disappearing women between East and West in a nostalgic old world style. So when people say, oh, it was like a burlesque train, it wasn't. There was nobody doing fan dances. It wasn't. It was nostalgic, and we used a lot of vintage clothes, but it was images of women stuck between two places, and the soundtrack was...
Did people just assume that it was burlesque because of the vintage imagery in it? Do you think it was just like a desire to kind of title it something, that's just what their go-to would be?
I think people have found it hard to... journalists and audiences want an easy sell, and they want to then kind of dumb down what you're doing, and they've wanted to dumb down... my show was about disappeared women and immigrant stories, but done in a really beautiful, nostalgic, theatrical, very feminine way, in a kind of, when I say feminine, I mean femme. I had some performers that were trans, but they were doing this femme style. Lots of them, they all started as women, but then gradually it slightly changed the casting, and it didn't become there was like two people that were trans in the show, and so it wasn't exclusively biological women. It was just everybody was very femme and very. So we had in the first version of the show we had Paloma Faith, who became, I don't think she's big there, but she's big here. It was her first job out of college. She was in our show. So, and I had lots of amazing...
And she started in burlesque, too. Paloma, didn't she? Did she perform at the Whoopee Club?
She did.
Am I making that up? She did, right?
Yes, and she would never... Mm-hmm. So she was in the Ghost Train before she was kind of doing the Whoopee stuff. She kind of came into the Ghost Train, and that kind of, I think, in her world... She was just literally just starting out. She found the Whoopee Club and all that sort of thing. But she never wanted to take any of her clothes off. I remember that very well. And she said, oh, I don't want to take my clothes off because, it will kind of follow me. And I was like, oh, who do you think you are? Follow you where? Like little did I know she was going places.
Yes.
So, yes, she did come out of that. But, so it was... Yes, it was Victorian-y and carnival-y, but when you say Victorian and carnival, people just think of... It tends to make you think of something quite cliched and corporate entertainment, playing around with those themes. So we were just really doing a thing that was... It was a ghosts inside a ghost train, and it was women's stories, disappeared women between East and West, in this very beautiful, nostalgic style, with illusions built in, and a cast of really amazing women. And really amazing women. They were just the women that were in the scene that I saw them, and I was like, oh, I love that woman. She's got to be in my show. So I had Gwen Gwendolyn Christie, who's now in Game of Thrones and is a huge superstar and in Star Wars.
Wow. That's amazing. She was in the Ghost Train.
She was. And I had
That's so cool.
I know. And Ty Shani, who now has just won the Turner Prize, which is the biggest art prize in England. And these were just really interesting. I think I was really interested in these performers and artists and wanted to put them in this show. And, that, and then that's something about community, isn't it? It's something about being with great people. And, and I've always thought, if it doesn't work out, I think I've got a career in casting.
Yes, clearly you do. So did you, doing the Ghost Train, you're dealing with such a heavy issue. I mean, that's really intense and terrible. Do you consciously use this imagery that's evocative of something like a carnival or a fair, set in this time period to kind of offset the subject, to kind of make it more digestible, this disappearing women? It's something that's still relevant today.
Yeah.
Do you kind of sugarcoat it or trick them in?
I guess, I think art can be anything it wants to be. And so it wasn't kind of set in an era. It's not like you go in and somebody says, oh, come into the past or something. We did do a different version of it when it went to Blackpool, which is this very traditional working class seaside town in Britain. We did make a more child-friendly version that was slightly easier to understand. But the first version was quite surreal. It was nostalgic, but some of the imagery looked kind of 30s and 40s. Some of the imagery looked, the 1880s, because there were different stories. They were images of women disappearing to this beautiful soundtrack. So it was subtly and gently bringing to this mind of ghosts disappearing between borders and between worlds. They're the things that haunt, when I think of what would have the journey of my great-grandparents been like? I don't know what their journey was like because I wasn't alive then. So I have this kind of dream-like idea that's not always a nice dream, but I have this kind of sense of things. So I just wanted to make this meditative, beautiful, memorable imagery of kind of women between two worlds with this kind of Eastern European coming into Western European flavour. So I don't think it has to be, it wasn't sugar-coated. It was just like being locked in a dream, but that dream is rooted in real issues around identity and memory and emotion and cultural identity. I think those things can be explored in a beautiful and interesting way. It doesn't have to be some really, politically correct, dull, not that necessarily is dull, but it doesn't have to be some kind of realist, I've been here for 30 years starving and my children starved as well. I think it can be a woman kind of trying to catch birds and disappearing through a wall. That says as much to me about loss and memory and cultural identity. I think.
For sure. When you put these stories together, I mean, I can't even imagine the scope of starting to put a project like this together and all the work that goes into it. Do you do a lot of research into the different issues and the different time periods and the aesthetics? How do you get an idea? What is the first step that you do to create these shows?
That is a good question.
It seems like so much work. It's overwhelming. I can't imagine.
I know, and I just kind of wonder why I do that. Really, I don't know how to do things in a simple way. And people go, "Oh, it's mad what you're doing. It's overwhelming," but it doesn't seem overwhelming. It just seems like normal. And so with the Ghost Train, I did preparation for that. So, the things, one thing grows into another thing, grows into another thing. So for the Jewess Tattooess, I looked at Eastern European and Jewish folk tales and around ghosts and demonology and the occult and girls and children. And that mushroomed into looking at the stories of women crossing borders from east to west, which I did in this other one called The Girl from Nowhere. And then I was at the same time I had a research grant from the National Fairground Archive in Britain, which archives show people's stories. So I was looking at show people that ran rides and what it is to be a show woman, which is my new thing, which is the book I'm writing, we hope.
Yes.
And it's about how to evolve this term from showgirl to showwoman, and where it came from and how we can change it to mean new things, because there's this whole new generation of us, which whilst we might refer to images from the past, might be a big part of our material or our interests. We are really doing something that wasn't done in the past, and we really are something beyond. We are something in our own right. And so I'm making this new show, one woman show, and I'm doing a book called Show Women.
I love this. I love the term show woman. And when I was reading and looking at all the research, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I have been a show woman for so long, and I've actually never considered or thought of the term show woman, and I've never looked at the term showman and thought, oh, there's no show woman when there should clearly be a show.
Exactly.
I felt like a ding dong. I was like, oh my God, duh, of course. When did you first think that thought? And I know I'm jumping away from how you build your shows, but it just feels right.
Oh, yeah.
Were you laying in bed one night and you were like, wait a minute?
No. So it all comes from the research. So I was researching at the National Fairground Archive on the history of ghost shows, which is the Victorian shows where they used to do phantasmagorias, which is projections into smoke or projections through glass. So I was looking at the history of that. So I was always looking at kind of technical stuff, and then the thematic stuff about, my themes, the immigrant sexualized body, the biblical Jewish body, the woman's body, crossing borders, fairy tales, folk tales, all that sort of thing. Love all that sort of thing. So I was looking at all that, blood, menstrual, blah, and looking at technical old show techniques. And then I was talking to this woman who's called Professor Vanessa Toulmin, and we were talking about women. I was saying, are there any women that ran rides, or is it all men in the fairground industry that run these bigger shows that are on the road, these moving shows? We call it the fairground here. It's a bit different to the culture in America. People run rides and they take them to local parks at Easter and Christmas, and they're mobile. And anyway, and there's no real tradition left. There used to be a tradition of live performance in the fair, more in the Victorian era, more like the midway. But there isn't really a tradition of that left in the UK. So anyway, I was like, did women ever run these shows? And she says, yes, as there are show men, there are show women. And so show women is really a term that only exists in the British culture to explain women that ran rides or that ran circuses. So like the boss. But it didn't dribble down, as it does with showman, to mean so much more, to mean showmanship, or to mean the guy that is the ringmaster, or and I think it's because we were always in this subjugated, infantilized, sexualized position of being the showgirl. So any kind of performance in a kind of cabaret, if you're being sexy, you're a showgirl. And even if you were explaining Grace Jones in a review, you'd call her, well, she's a great showgirl. It just is so synonymous with any kind of sexy performing woman. And I wondered why, whereas with the term showman, it's not just the boss that runs the amusement. It's also somebody that has the flair and wears the top hat. And you go, what a showman. You go, David Blaine, what a showman. And I'm like, why don't you go Marina Abramovich? What a showwoman. And I wondered why. And so I am attempting to widen the phrase out from its roots. So I found the phrase being connected to traditional nomadic show people. And then I thought we could apply it so much more. And then I thought it's political in a sense, because we call Donald Trump a showman. We call Boris Johnson a showman. We go, oh, well, a great showman. So showman just says something negative because of its associations with Barnum and the exhibition of marginalized people. And then I just thought, I'm never quite right. Sometimes I'm on time with these projects and these ideas, but of course, they put out the film, The Greatest Showman, one of the biggest films ever. I should have had my showwoman show ready then. I didn't. What can I do? I'm doing my best.
Well, listen, you got the tattoo one, you nailed that one right on the head, and you're not far behind.
No.
I mean, I think that film probably brought that word into the vocabulary of a lot of younger people.
Yes.
Because, I mean, we know that word, but I'm sure like the under, 18 crowd, it's not the same. It's not the same.
True.
So I think the door is still open,
Thanks.
Marisa.
Thank you. I'm going as fast as I can. I've always felt that.
But it is so amazing. Like, really, one project for you leads directly to the next.
It's just really nice that you've researched this, and it makes me feel valued and that I've contributed to the community, because what happens, which is part of my Showwoman project as well, is that I've been doing this for years and years and years, but I'm not kind of hugely celebrated at the moment in the UK. And I'm still fighting to do what I do. I haven't transitioned into a wider medium. So I haven't transitioned into film. I don't own a theatre. I mean, I'm trying to set up my school in a more solid way, which would put me in a stronger position. But I'm currently, in a sense, still fighting for to do the projects in the way I used to be. And then there's people kind of coming up behind me. And I remember this with my tutor, and I remember her feeling a sense that she felt marginalized by people like me. And now I really know what that feels like. And people have long forgotten what it is you've done, unless it's somebody lovely like you that is making me feel valued.
No, you should feel your work. You won the Lawrence Olivier Award.
I know, but it doesn't matter. I go for a job in the local university, and I go, yes, I've got an Olivier Award and a doctorate. And then they go, we're really sorry, we can't give you the job, because in a sense I'm overqualified.
Right.
So it's you constantly have to. So I can't really go and join a faculty now. I kind of have to make my own faculty. So it's, if you set yourself up as the boss and you do all these iconic projects for years and years, you can't then go, and now I'd like a tenured place in your university with a full pension, paid holidays, and a house. And I think I deserve that. They go, well, you're a little bit too much out of the box for us. So you still have to then go, I still have to take the risk. I still have to go, okay, so I'll rent the building and I'll get I'll find people that will accredit my degree and I'll take all the risks myself. So you can't have a life of taking risks and being a maverick and being before your time and then settle into your professorship, which I have found quite depressing, because I thought... No,
it is.
I thought, I'll do all this and then I'll have a nice 10 years with a salary.
Well, you aren't done yet, but this is definitely... And like you said it in the beginning, like, you never wanted to be in anybody else's show. You wanted to do your own thing. And I think that that's so true. Like, when you are that trailblazer and you go off on your own route, and then you go back to the regular world and you might want some normalcy and some like regularity in life, they just don't know what to do with you because... You're a white tiger, you're the rare bird.
Yes.
You must pick up inspiration and get rooted in different situations and different alleys and lanes. Like, you know magic and illusion too. You studied magic and illusion.
Yeah, so when I was kind of.
I love that.
Well,
That's amazing.
Well, again, it was like, I was naked for a large part of my career, very naked, and taking off lots of my clothes. And then I just got really interested in illusion when I decided I wanted to build the ride. And part of the reason I built the ride was because I wanted my shows, I wanted to do bigger shows with more people in, and I wanted to be in big, fancy culture centres in the proper art centre, in the opera houses, and I couldn't get my work in. So I thought, if I can't get into the big theatre, I'll build a big theatre.
Ooh, why not?
That's what I thought. Why not? And I mean, it pulled the life out of me. I mean, I didn't really realise what I was getting into. I mean, I had wanted to have children and I had wanted to have a family, and I built the Ghost Train at that moment, and it affected my relationships. It was all consuming. And I think in a sense, sadly, that was, I tried to have a child. I made a show about this afterwards. I miscarried and And people say, oh, what did I put? I always make this joke, I've got this friend and she pulls things out of her vagina. I've got a few friends.
So do I.
Yeah, exactly. I've pulled things out of my vagina. So I think, Thingy or whatever pulled things out of her vagina. That's what she's famous for. And I'm famous for pulling a great big fucking ghost train out of my vagina. And it was a painful birth. So there is a cost in being a showwoman and having this ambition that grips you like a vice. It's not all plain sailing, and it's hard and it's compromising, and the road is littered with some pain. But I got interested. I was finding out about the technical side of ghost trains and research on ghost trains and what is inside rides, and lots of muse illusion. And I wanted to do illusions. But I did a piece which will come up when I have the archives up that you'd have been interested in. When I stopped dancing in the East End, dancing professionally as a burlesque dancer, but as a kind of stripper, I worked with a production company, Ducky, who's this kind of queer production club, arts, blah. Anyway, we hired an old-fashioned funeral carriage like the one in Oliver Twist, with live black stallions pulling it, who were all feathered, like a Victorian funeral carriage. And I worked with the illusionist Paul Keeve, and this is before the Ghost Train, we built a thing where I laid in a showgirl outfit inside the funeral casket, in a glass funeral casket, and people pulled by black feathered horses. Wow. And people followed me on Midsummer's Evening round the East End. We went round all the strip clubs I'd worked in, and I laid a part of my costume outside each strip club, and that was the end of my stripping career.
Wow.
So that was my stripper's funeral, and people thought I died. Two strippers came out of one of the clubs, and they were like, what's all this then? And she said, oh, is that Marisa? And she said, oh, she's dead. So it was we didn't stage that. We didn't know that was going to happen. I wish we'd filmed that.
I wish you filmed that. That sounds amazing. I want to talk about something you said. You talked about the ghost train and, pulling the ghost train out of your vagina. You talked about thinking that you had wanted to have children at one point and miscarrying, which I love that you mentioned, because I too have miscarried. And I think that women don't talk about this enough. And I think in the arts, especially, that we're in a unique place because your career flies by the moment, and it's like, you don't want to give up a singular opportunity to have a family, and in my case, I miscarried a couple years ago, and I had my daughter 5 years ago, and she was an accident, which is the funny part. But if that accident had not happened, I don't think that I would have ever stopped to have a family, because I think as women, as show women, that's an opportunity that we're really not afforded.
Well, we're living in a man's world on a man's timeline, and so it's all about being competitive and getting somewhere and getting somewhere and getting somewhere. And I just, like you say, exactly that. There was never a moment that I could stop, and there was never a moment that But I think that's also, some kind of madness that I have, that I couldn't stop, and that I had to carry on, and that I couldn't miss. And I think with time and with age and with wisdom, you realise you have to stop sometimes. But saying that, I haven't actually stopped in 30 years, and I'm still not stopping. But what was I going to say? I talk about, so that became, so I was doing the showroom project. I was all doing this showroom project. That was what I was working on. done the ghost train, and then there's this other one where I brought the tarot to life on roller skates for the Cultural Olympiad. I had 30 performers, did the major arcana on roller skates. Just did that. I was just doing that. That happened.
Just that.
That didn't take off quite as much. I guess I always wanted to have like the next La Soiree, I wanted to be the next Le Clique, a lot of those shows that actually do come out of Australia.
Yes, great shows.
I don't know what it is they're doing there, but they're doing something right there. And Hot Brown Honey is the case in point, which is such an important show, which is such a brilliant, clever show. So there was I, having done this tarot one, wanting it to be a big international touring show. It was too big and unwieldy. We had a wrestling ring, we had a troupe of skaters, and it's nuts. And we toured it a little bit, but not what I wanted. And then I was putting on this tarot show, and I was married to a young New Yorker, actually.
Oh.
Yeah, which didn't go so well in time, and we are now divorced, who I met in New York, because, I came with this ducky show, and we did the Christmas season at PS 122 with this.
Oh, wow.
We danced on the tables, and this was in 2009, and we had special guests.
And this was an interactive show, right?
Yes,
this was a very interactive show.
Yeah, I mean, I was part of the devising team of that show. It was never my favourite show. I was one of the people that created the show, and I was in it. And PS 122, they managed to get it to New York. And because I wasn't the director, I think I always was didn't think it was my show, but I had been one of the creators, but I was in it. And we had great guests. As we were running the Ghost Train, I was touring as a performer in that at the same time. And I had to choose between which one to do. So I missed the tour to Australia with the Ducky show because I was doing the Ghost Train. So I was really conflicted at that time. Anyway, and at that moment in New York, I met a young guy from Montana.
Oh, Montana.
who was the assistant on the show in New York. I won't name him. And I ended up marrying him, and we were together, and he moved to London, and we tried to have a child. And anyway, that didn't work out. It was very sad because I was running a billion shows at the same time, this tarot one. So then I decided to do a PhD to explore menstruation, and I decided to make a magic show about menstruation using a cast of amazing women. And within that show, I do talk about my miscarriages quite graphically, but in a tasteful and poetic way. But in that show, I've got amazing performers. So I had Fancy Chance, who is...
Oh, wow.
Yeah. She hair hanged. We had her hair hanging, and I had Rhiannon Stiles, that's a trans... she's the first trans columnist for Elle magazine, and we had all amazing people, lots of amazing people. It goes on, but Mr. Blue, who comes from New York a lot.
Missa. Yep.
Yeah, so I had Mr. Blue, sword swallowing, talking about menstruation and sword swallowing. So it was all extraordinary women doing extraordinary things and talking about menstruation, but in a very stylized, clever, nice way. And I've toured that show we started working on it in 2015, and then we finished touring it in 2019. And we all talk about our own kind of fertility stories, even if we don't have even the women in the group that didn't want to have children, and they all find their own weird angle on it. And so that was, and they were all from a kind of a burlesque background, a cabaret burlesque background. And we toured that. Again, I wanted that to have more international touring. And I tried, and it was a great show. People were crying in the audience.
I was gonna say, that show must have had such an impact on people, because when I miscarried, it is such a horrible experience. It's such a lonely and isolating experience. It's something that people don't talk about. Like, even my mother, God bless her, and my aunts, they're all just like, when I first found out I was pregnant, don't tell anybody, because what if something happens? And then you just kind of get this in your head. And then when it happened, I was like, why do I fucking care if everybody knows this happens? Why is this taboo? It happens to so many people.
Yes.
And it's almost like, I got so much support from my friends that I had no idea had miscarried, like just coming to my aid in that moment. And it's a club. It's a sad club, but without their support, I really think my days would have been darker for a lot longer. So I can't imagine how that must resonate, just to lay it all out there.
Yes.
Fertility, menstruation, put it on the stage. I love it.
Exactly. And it was resonant for lots of people in the audience. And the other thing was that, it was for women, that show, and it was looking at all different women's experiences from, Fancy looked at her experience with having been put on birth control at a really young age and how that affected her and how that affected her whole life. And she looked at her experience of having been adopted, which she also looks at in her one-woman show. And so everybody had a very interesting perspective to come from. But we were playing with the aesthetics of horror. We used like the music from Suspiria. I looked like an Italian giallo 1970s horror lady, like I was a kind of weird professor lecturer. And then my costume all came apart and it was all bleeding. And that was inspired by this 1980s film where Isabella Adjani is like bleeding in the Paris subway, this film called Possession. So it was really filmic and it was really arty and it was really referencing a lot of horror films and women in horror films. And so I felt, and it had really brilliant music, and we used the music from Roman Polanski's Rosemary's Baby and like loads of brilliant. Of it was very witchy and we were all witchy and it was all bloody and witchy and all ends up being it's like it starts as a lecture about the anthropology of menstrual rituals, and I come on as this lecturer, and then it ends up being a menstrual ritual, and stylized, and so I felt that men, if men had the balls to come to it, or men, of course, women dragged their partners along to it, but it was mainly an audience of women. But I just felt like it was such a shame. So I knew these kind of hipster guys that were really into like Italian horror, and I was like, hey, you didn't come to my show. And they're like, oh, well, it's not for us. And I was like, yeah, but I used this music and that music, and we had this styling and this reference, and it was like that. And they were like really nerdy horror guy stuff. But of course, they never would have known, men are just like, I don't want to know. I don't want to know about menstruation. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want you to talk about it. And of course, they didn't realize we were just doing the most stylish show about menstruation that you could possibly imagine.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And your projects are so huge. It's just insanity. Like, how do you work on the funding and getting people? Do you do a lot of grants? Do you get a lot of grants to do these projects? That's exhausting. Woo!
I've been doing grants for 30 years.
That's amazing.
Grant after grant after grant. I've got waiting to hear on 2 at the moment. You've always got to have 2 or 3 ahead of yourself. Yeah,
for sure. And they just catch up as you go. It's crazy.
Yeah. So then you finish one project and you're straight into the next.
Yeah.
Which is also, and like, you lose, like the idea that you're exhausted is just like, I'm so beyond exhausted.
You just can't. It's a lifestyle. Exhaustion is a lifestyle.
Yeah.
It's absolutely a lifestyle. Showbiz.
Yeah, I don't know. You get used to it. And the new show is about that. It's about endurance. You learn to endure. You really, I think, to be in shows and to make shows. I mean, yes, I get these arts grants. They might not last forever. Some of the work pays for itself, turns over at the box office, but I usually have to have some kind of grant to start it off.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to now fully establish my school.
That's
as
exciting.
My next big project, and I'm going to do another one-woman show, but a one-woman show, a book, and a school. That's what I've got now.
Just those 3 projects?
Just those, and that's my.
Marisa, I have to tell you, this is my word. Like when you talk about endurance, I made up this word many years ago because, burlesque is the same. It's just a never ending hustle. You're always working. You have to have a job after a job after a job lined up, and there's no rest. And if your gig goes till 5 o'clock in the morning and you got to work at 6 o'clock in the morning, you just do it. So I call it glamina. It's glamour and stamina
that. Oh, I
mixed
love
together.
Oh,
Glamina. So Marisa, thank you so much for being here and being with me on the Bump and Grind today. I had a lovely time chatting with you.
Me too.
And I look forward to your projects.
Yes. Well, you must come and I must interview you and put you in things. So I will be in touch.
Put me in a thing.
I'm going to put you in a thing.
Put me in a thing. Thank you so much, Marisa.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that chat. Be sure to look Marisa up and keep abreast of her projects on Instagram at Marisa Carnesky. That's MarisaCarnesky. You know where to find me at Angie Pontani. Please be sure to like, follow, subscribe, and leave a fabulous review for the Bump and Grind wherever you are streaming us from. And until next week, keep shimmying and shaking, and I will see you backstage.
This has been a Giant Panda King production. You can find us at giantpandaking.com and on Instagram at giantpandaking.